The silence before the first thought is the truest sound in existence. It is not peace, it is the void's breath, echoing through the cavity of consciousness, hollow and without warmth. Before the will stirs, before desire whispers its first lie, there is only this, the heavy stillness of being. You do not emerge into the world as a miracle. You arrive as a wound, torn into time, sentenced to suffer under the weight of existence. The first cry of the newborn is not joy, it is protest, an unconscious scream against the pain of becoming. This is the origin of all things, not light, not love, but longing. Existence does not ask for your consent, it demands your presence. Thrown into flesh, you awaken in a prison of nerve and perception, bound to a self you never chose. You are not born free, you are born tethered to hunger, to pain, to the ceaseless gnawing of desire. Even your mind, that great illusionist, serves not truth but survival, spinning fantasies around your cage, decorating your chains so you might forget they are chains. Every thought is a mask for the abyss beneath it. Every belief is a spell cast to distract from the silence beneath the noise, and yet that silence persists. It waits in the background of every laughter, every triumph, every pursuit. The silence knows. The silence remembers what you try to forget, that nothing you seek will satisfy what you are. The world teaches you early to run from discomfort, from emptiness, from the ache that dwells in the center of being. It offers pleasures, identities, and futures like narcotics. You are told to dream, to strive, to conquer. But what is ambition if not a more sophisticated form of fear? The fear of stillness, the terror of meeting oneself without pretense. What you call success is often only a louder distraction. What you call purpose is a story told to keep the soul from collapsing under its own weight. You chase wholeness as though it were hidden in the future, unaware that it is the pursuit itself that fractures you. There is no completion awaiting you on the horizon. There is only the mirage and the desert, and your footprints slowly fading behind you. Every longing reveals its futility in the moment of its fulfillment. The meal ends and hunger returns. The touch fades and loneliness resumes. Even the sweetest pleasures rot into memory, leaving behind only a deeper craving. Desire is a flame that feeds on the fuel of its own failure. The more you feed it, the more ravenous it becomes. This is not a defect of life, it is its very structure. Will is the engine of existence, but it is not wise. It does not know peace, it does not seek rest. It moves because it must, not because there is meaning at its destination. You are not driven by purpose, you are pushed by compulsion. And so, the self becomes a stage upon which the tragedy of becoming plays out. You wear masks to please, to belong, to be seen, forgetting that the face beneath has long since withered from neglect. You curate a version of yourself for the world, but each mask you wear is a betrayal of the silence within. You say, "This is me," and point to the role you've rehearsed, the identity that receives applause. But beneath all roles, the self remains a question without an answer, a hollow space no affirmation can fill. You seek to be understood, but even that is a hidden form of violence, a wish for someone else to validate your illusion. Suffering is not the interruption of life's meaning, it is its constant companion. It does not visit, it dwells. To live is to ache, to lack, to strain toward that which forever recedes. Pain is the price of consciousness. The moment you become aware, you become divided. You see what is, and you see what could be, and the distance between them is agony. Animals suffer, yes, but they do not torment themselves with ideals. Only man dreams of being more than he is, and thus lives in the shadow of what he can never attain. Every improvement is a deeper entanglement. Every advancement, a new form of despair. Civilization, that proud monument to human effort, is but a palace built atop a graveyard of unmet needs. What then is joy, if not a brief suspension of pain, a fleeting reprieve from the sharpness of existence? You laugh not because life is beautiful, but because it is unbearable. Laughter is the scream muffled into music. It is the sound of awareness recoiling from the truth. You speak of hope, of love, of transcendence. But these are myths, the weary tale to soften the edge of the blade. Love? It is not the merging of souls, it is the temporary erasure of loneliness. A beautiful illusion, yes, but an illusion still. When it fades, as it must, it leaves you not healed, but haunted. And hope? It is the opiate of the future, a hallucination that makes the present more tolerable by imagining its opposite. To awaken is not to be free, it is to see the gears turning behind the spectacle, to see the hunger that moves all things, and to know that you are not exempt. You are not the author of your desires. You are their servant. You did not choose your hunger, you inherited it. You did not invent your pain, it was gifted to you by birth, by biology, by the cold arithmetic of cause and effect. The ego, that fragile narrator of your story, clings to agency as a drowning man clings to driftwood. But in truth, you are not steering this ship, you are being carried endlessly by the currents of necessity. And yet, within this terrible clarity, there is a strange kind of peace. Not the peace of pleasure, but the peace of surrender. When you cease to fight the nature of existence, when you stop demanding that life be something other than what it is, a quiet space opens within. A space where nothing is expected, and therefore nothing is denied. This is not happiness. It is not healing. It is merely the absence of resistance. The stillness that follows disillusionment. The breath you take when you finally accept that the summit is a mirage, and that the journey itself is a wandering without end. You are not meant to be whole. You are meant to see, to observe the tides of will and not drown in them, to walk the corridors of your own mind and not flinch at what you find. Wholeness is not a state of perfection, but the awareness of your own fragmentation. It is not unity, it is lucidity. When you can hold your contradictions without flinching, when you can sit in the silence without reaching for distraction, then you have touched something sacred. Not the divine, not the eternal, but the simple, brutal truth of what it means to be human. The night deepens. The stars, those indifferent witnesses, continue their cold dance. And you, trembling creature, sit beneath them, not as a master, not as a chosen one, but as a question. A trembling question carved into flesh. Do you see it now? The absurdity, the beauty, the unbearable clarity of your condition. There is no redemption arc, no triumphant return. Only this moment, this breath, this fleeting glimpse into the heart of being. You have not failed by suffering, you have only opened your eyes. The body, that uninvited guest, bears its own tyranny. It decays even as it grows. It desires even when the soul is weary. And yet it is through the body that all suffering arrives through its hunger, its loneliness, its injuries, its aging. You do not inhabit it as a sovereign, but as a hostage. It commands your waking and punishes your resistance. It makes you vulnerable to time, and time, that silent predator, gnaws at you with every breath. It does not ask for your attention, it takes it. You are born into a sentence whose duration you do not control and whose ending is certain but never predictable. This is not cruelty. This is structure. The illusions are merciful, for without them the mind collapses beneath the weight of its own insight. And so you believe in continuity, in purpose, in love that lasts, in effort that redeems. These are not lies exactly, they are necessary hallucinations. The will hides itself behind them, using them to perpetuate itself. Every dream of a better future is an anesthetic against the horror of now. But there comes a time when the illusions falter. A loss too sharp, a betrayal too deep, a silence too wide, and suddenly the curtain lifts. The machinery reveals itself, and you are left face to face with the naked machinery of wanting. There is no longer a story, only repetition, only the endless turning of the same wheel. This is when the self begins to dissolve, not as an act of transcendence, but as an act of despair. The ego, that brittle fortress, cracks. Its voice softens, its desires lose their urgency. What once seemed meaningful now appears as theater, a choreography of necessity masquerading as choice. The laughter of youth becomes the silence of age. The need to impress gives way to the need to endure. What you once called growth is often just the shedding of illusions. Maturity is not achievement, it is resignation. It is learning to sit with the ache, without needing to name it something noble. The world will not save you, it does not know your name. Its systems are designed for consumption, not for contentment. It wants your labor, not your peace. It craves your attention, not your understanding. You are a commodity in the marketplace of distraction, and your suffering is profitable only when it can be disguised as aspiration. Even your despair is marketed, transformed into a brand, a persona, a niche. There is no dignity in this transaction, only exhaustion. You are not seen, you are used. And yet still, somewhere deep in the marrow, a quiet awareness persists. It watches as the roles unravel, as the cravings fade, as the masks fall to the ground. This awareness does not speak, it does not comfort, it only sees. It sees that all effort to become something is rooted in the fear of being nothing. It sees that all striving is rooted in shame, the shame of incompleteness. And it begins to whisper a truth too heavy for most to carry. That there is no wholeness, because there is no fixed self to be made whole. The self is a flicker, a trembling, a temporary arrangement of suffering. To detach is not to deny, it is to witness without grasping. It is to feel the longing rise, but not follow it. To let the wave pass through without building a boat to chase it. This detachment is not indifference, it is intimacy without illusion. It is love without possession. It is desire stripped of fantasy. You walk through life like a ghost, present yet untouched. You are not cold, you are clear. You no longer demand that the world soothe you, you allow it to wound you. And in doing so, you no longer fear it. Even death loses its horror in this space. Not because you conquer it, but because you no longer believe in the permanence of what it threatens. Death does not end the self, it ends the pretense of self. It reveals the silence that was always beneath your voice. The nothingness you feared becomes the rest you longed for. There is no terror in returning to what you never left. There is only the final breath and the letting go. Grief becomes a companion. Not the loud grief of mourning, but the quiet grief of understanding. You grieve not only for the losses you endure, but for the lives you will never live. The versions of you that withered before they could bloom. You grieve for the world, not because it is evil, but because it is blind. It stumbles through its own suffering, inflicting pain not from malice, but from ignorance. And you grieve for those who still believe, who still chase, who still kneel before the idols of fulfillment, not with contempt, but with tenderness. For you, too, once drank from that poisoned well. And slowly, as all these false lights dim, a darker clarity emerges. You begin to see that surrender is not defeat. It is the beginning of authenticity. Not the authenticity of expression, but the authenticity of emptiness. You are no longer pretending to be a character in a story. You are simply a moment of perception in a sea of impermanence. There is a dignity in this, not a proud dignity, but a solemn one. The dignity of standing alone beneath a sky that does not answer. There is no more need to strive, no more need to define, to prove, to impress. You walk as one who has seen the machinery behind the curtain and has chosen stillness over spectacle. You do not speak loudly, you do not seek converts. Your truth does not require an audience. It simply is like a stone at the bottom of a river, unmoved by the current above. To live with open eyes is to accept that life is not a gift, but a burden dressed in ritual. The hours pass not as opportunities, but as obligations. One awakes each morning not with a sense of blessing, but with the weight of continuation. The dreams evaporate, and the body, still tethered to its chains of fatigue and desire, resumes its wandering. Each day is not a page in a story, it is a repetition of the same sentence written in a different hand. One eats not to celebrate, but to silence the scream of the stomach. One speaks not to connect, but to interrupt the silence that reminds us we are alone. There is no glory in persistence, only inertia. And so we invent purpose, like children drawing constellations in a sky that offers no shape. We call this constellation career, that one legacy. Another family, another still truth. But these are projections onto the void, flickers of meaning desperately imposed upon the chaos. The stars remain indifferent. The sky does not care what patterns we see in it. And yet we cling to these sketches, for without them, the darkness feels too honest. How fragile we are to need illusions to survive, and how tragic that the more intelligent the creature, the deeper its suffering. The animal hungers, yes, but it does not ask why. It does not demand purpose. It does not write philosophy. But man cursed with the intellect to question and the incapacity to find satisfying answers suffers doubly, first from his pain, and then from the meaninglessness of that pain. He builds temples, pens scriptures, constructs ideologies, all to wrap the ache in narrative. But the ache remains. And when the stories collapse, as all stories must, what is left is not enlightenment, it is nakedness. This nakedness is unbearable to most, so they return to the theater, to the rituals of ambition and romance, to the fantasy that if they try a little harder, believe a little more, distract themselves a little longer, the void will close. But the void does not close. It watches, it waits, it exists not as enemy, but as mirror. And when you finally sit before it without pretense, when you allow its gaze to meet yours without flinching, then the war ends. Not in victory, not in defeat, but in cessation. You stop demanding that life be beautiful. You stop asking for justice from a world that has never promised fairness. You stop expecting healing from a wound that is fundamental. And in this stopping, a new kind of vision opens. You begin to see the tragic poetry in everything. The old man walking alone, the child crying for no reason, the lover clinging to a fading touch, the addict praying to a God who no longer answers. These are not failures. They are the truth, unclothed. The veil has lifted. What remains is not horror, but tenderness, compassion, born not of hope, but of recognition. You no longer look at others as problems to solve or souls to save. You see them as fellow exiles, each one carrying their portion of sorrow, each one pretending in their own way. And so your voice softens, your judgments dissolve. You realize there is no hierarchy in suffering, no competition in despair. Even the joyful, even the successful, they too are wounded. Only their masks are more convincing. And perhaps then you stop searching, not because you have found, but because you have seen that there is nothing to find. The idea that there is a treasure buried beneath the ruins is another myth. The ruins are the treasure. The brokenness is the clarity. Every disappointment, every betrayal, every moment of isolation, they were not detours. They were the path. They stripped you down to what you are, a flicker of awareness floating in impermanence. Even your memories betray you. You reach for them like relics, hoping for comfort, but they fade. They distort, they lie. What you remember is not what happened, but what your mind made of it in retrospect. The past is not a place, it is a collage, shifting with every glance. And the future, a fog, a rumor, a fantasy projected onto the unknowable. Only the present remains, and even it slips away the moment you name it. Time is not linear, it is erosion, and we are the cliff, crumbling into the sea. But if there is beauty, it lies in this crumbling, not in what is built, but in what collapses, not in the mask, but in the moment it falls. The tear on a stranger's cheek, the silence after an argument, the gaze of someone who no longer believes, but still remains. These are the sacred moments, not because they uplift, but because they reveal. They show us what we are without costume, frightened, yearning, impermanent. And in that exposure, there is grace. You no longer seek to fix yourself. You stop framing your pain as pathology. It is not something to heal, it is something to understand. You are not broken, you are breaking, continually, necessarily. That is the condition of being aware. The more clearly you see, the less tightly you cling to goals, to images, to the idea of being whole. There is no wholeness, only the dance of fragments. And to witness those fragments, without trying to force them into a shape, this is enough. You may sit now, beneath the fading sky, and know that your aloneness is not a defect. It is a mirror of the cosmos itself. The stars burn without audience. The mountains crumble without lament. The sea swallows without guilt. And you can weep without apology. You can exist without justification. You need not be useful. You need not be understood. You are not a project. You are a presence. And in this presence, this quiet vigil at the edge of understanding, you begin to feel the loosening. Not joy, not relief, but a stillness. The wind moves through you. The sorrow hums like a low chant in your chest. And you do not run. You do not reach. You do not hope. You simply are a witness to the unraveling. A breath in the hush between illusions. A question that no longer demands an answer. There is a peculiar stillness that arrives when one abandons the pursuit of coherence. The self once feverishly stitched together with narratives and names, begins to unravel not in panic, but in relief. You stop trying to explain yourself to yourself. The need to make your suffering make sense dissolves. It does not need meaning to exist. It simply is, like the wind through a broken window or the slow rotting of fruit left untouched. There is no why. There is only what happens. And what happens, more often than not, is sorrow. Not the loud sorrow of catastrophe, but the quiet erosion of spirit, the fading of dreams, the dulling of joy, the slow dawning that nothing you cling to can last. Friends become strangers. Lovers become memories. Even your own reflection, once familiar, begins to resemble someone else. The tragedy is not that things end. The tragedy is that you ever believed they wouldn't. People speak of identity as if it were a treasure, something to discover and polish. But identity is a mask, woven from repetition and fear. You wear it to survive the gaze of others and eventually forget that it is not your skin. When it begins to crack, you panic. But the panic is not about losing yourself. It is about losing the illusion that you ever had one. What you call I is not a single thing. It is a bundle of reactions, cravings, and stories told to quiet the dread. To let go of identity is not to vanish, but to stop pretending. This is the beginning of detachment, not the sterile kind preached in spiritual markets, but the raw, bleak clarity that arises when you realize there is nothing worth clinging to. Not because the world is evil, but because it is transient. Everything slips, everything. What you love will leave. What you build will fall. What you achieve will fade. Even your memories will become strangers in time. You are not betrayed by life. You are simply witnessing its nature. Detachment is not withdrawal. It is not numbness. It is not the absence of care. It is the refusal to grasp. You feel everything more deeply when you stop trying to possess it. You let the world pass through you, like wind through trees fully felt, but not held. You do not armor yourself against loss. You let loss pierce you, and in doing so, you discover that there is nothing beneath the pain but more silence. There is no redemption, no final moment where the suffering proves itself worthwhile. The idea that life justifies itself in retrospect is another dream, another opiate. What you endure is not preparation for glory, it is simply endurance. The rain falls not to nourish, but because it must. The night comes not to rest you, but because the earth turns. There is no plot, there is no lesson, there is only experience and the consciousness that drowns in it. And yet within this drowning, there is something pure. Not salvation, but truth. A bleak, undressed truth that no sermon can touch. That your pain is not personal. That your longing is not unique. That your silence is shared by all things, even those that seem to sing. The bird does not chirp in joy. It calls out for territory, for mating, for survival. Its song is not beauty, it is instinct, and so is yours. Even your poetry is a form of bleeding. But in this recognition, there is communion, a silent companionship with all that suffers. You walk among the trees, and you no longer name them. You no longer seek their meaning. You simply feel their stillness, their indifference, their slow death. And it feels like home. You sit with the dying, not to comfort, but to witness. You gaze at the crumbling stone, and you see yourself not in the grandeur of decay, but in its inevitability. This is not depression, it is perception unsoftened. A kind of sobriety that no longer requires hope to stand. You stop needing life to explain itself. You stop needing to be someone. You live like mist present, yet without center. A fading that knows itself as fading. A gesture toward nothing in particular. And as the world continues its frantic dance, its wars, its weddings, its sales and spectacles, you move through it untouched, not because you do not feel, but because you no longer mistake feeling for meaning. Joy comes and you bow to it. Sorrow comes and you bow to that too. You make no altar of either. You hold no preference. You are not above life. You are simply beside it, watching. Even love changes. It is no longer possession, nor need, nor the desperate fusion of broken selves. It becomes a kind of silent presence, a mourning for what will inevitably be lost. You love not despite the impermanence, but because of it. You do not say forever, you say for now. And in that small honesty, there is a greater tenderness than all the vows eternity could offer. There is a kind of holiness in futility, in doing the thing not because it will last, but because it is yours to do in this fleeting hour. You sweep the floor that will be dusty again tomorrow. You speak the word that will be forgotten. You touch the hand that will one day vanish. You live not to triumph, but to participate, not to build, but to be. You do not fight the tide, you become the shore it erodes. And in the end, there is no end. Only dissolution, like a candle that does not extinguish, but simply runs out of wax. No applause, no closure, just a quiet vanishing of flame. And perhaps, in that vanishing, a peace more honest than any joy the world could offer. What remains when the longing has quieted? Not serenity, not bliss, but a still emptiness, soft and unresisting, like a field beneath snow. No destination, no arrival, just the absence of motion. The will, once loud and tyrannical, falls silent, like a monarch discovering its kingdom was illusion. You do not ascend, you do not awaken to some greater truth. You simply stop grasping, and in that ceasing, you discover that you were never holding anything real. All that effort, all that striving, it was the dream of a shadow chasing light that never belonged to it. Even memory now drifts like smoke. The names, the faces, the stories you told yourself, they fade, not in bitterness, but in disinterest. They no longer demand to be real. You carry no resentment because you carry nothing. Even grief, that faithful companion, has loosened its grip, not because you have healed, but because you have ceased resisting its presence. It becomes like breath, constant, unnoticed, no longer sharp. There is nothing left to achieve. You do not fear death because you no longer need continuity. What once terrified you, the idea of ending now, feels inevitable, even welcome. Not in despair, but in completion. A candle does not mourn its extinguishing. The flame simply ceases, and the wax remembers nothing of its burning. So too with you. You vanish, and the world continues, untroubled. The trees remain indifferent. The sky does not flinch. To have lived, then, is to have suffered, not as punishment, but as necessity. And in that suffering, you glimpsed the only truth worthy of reverence, that nothing endures, and thus everything is sacred in its vanishing. The soft hand withdrawn, the voice that grows quiet, the final exhale before sleep, these are not signs of failure. They are the rhythm of reality asserting itself. And you, no longer fighting, no longer naming, can now see it for what it is. A great still turning, without center, without goal. No path leads out of this awareness. No transformation awaits. You remain yourself, not renewed, not reborn, but reduced to essence, like stone after fire, like ash after flame. And this essence is not radiant, it is not divine, it is silent. A presence stripped of expectation, of ambition, of narrative. You are not the hero, you are not the villain, you are not even the one watching the play. You are the empty stage after the audience has gone. You are the echo long after the cry. What little comfort exists is not in understanding, but in witnessing. You see clearly now that to be whole was never the task. You were not meant to become, you were meant to observe, and in that observation to dissolve, slowly, without protest. Like the tide withdrawing from a shore it never claimed. The world remains, but you no longer belong to it. Not as a participant, not as a seeker. You move through it like wind, through leaves, touching everything, holding nothing. Not cold, but free of warmth's demand. Not distant, but unentangled. You do not wish to change anything. You do not wish to be remembered. You do not wish. The night deepens, and you feel no urgency. The stars blink, and you do not ask what they mean. The wind sighs through branches, and you do not mistake it for a message. The silence returns, not empty, but complete. And in that silence, you no longer need to speak. You are not whole. You never were. You never needed to be. You were only ever passing through. And now you vanish, like all things quietly, without fanfare, into the stillness from which you came.